The following video is a more informal presentation in contrast to my previous videos. Whilst I still certainly intend to make more formally presented video essays, I will be using this informal structure to introduce two theories of power which I believe are related to important continuing themes associated with this channel. The two theories of power I will be alluding to are from the respective philosophies of Friedrich Nietzsche and Michel Foucault. Foucault is, of course, being a philosopher who I have quoted and remarked numerous times in my most recent video essays. Additionally, I have also tried to keep the information I present here densely packed and the video length as short as possible, so there is certainly room for further description and/or elaboration upon these two philosophies. Without further ado, I shall begin. When we usually think about power in a contemporary context, we are usually thinking about very overt forms of power displays, often in the context of negative outcomes and consequences. Very overt forms of power might include everything from the macro-level displays of warfare and monarchies, to more micro-level displays such as institutional violence and interpersonal antisocial behaviors. In each of these overt macro and micro levels of power, there is usually a hierarchy of one or many over the other or others. However, upon further inspection, power typically exemplifies itself beyond explicit hierarchies and positive-negative binaries in more nuanced contexts. For example, in the Oxford English Dictionary, the term power as a noun is described in several different ways. The first definition defines power as the ability to control people or things, such as commanding certain actions from people or harvesting crop as an object to be ate. The second definition defines power as the ability or opportunity to do something, such as the ability to write, sing, or dance. Power in this sense refers to one's abilities or capacities, which typically involve some level of skill or proficiency. The third definition defines power as the right or authority of a person or group to do something, such as the authority of former US President George W. Bush to sign into law the Patriot Act in 2001 and veto the Medicare Prescription Drug Price Negotiation Act in 2007. The fourth definition defines power as the strength or influence in a particular area of activity, such as the way media might sway public opinion about a particular issue. The fifth definition defines power as the strength or energy contained in something, such as the energy stored in a nuclear power plant. Other definitions of power from the Oxford English Dictionary include physical strength used in action, a country with a lot of influence in world affairs or with great military strength, and the abilities of a person's body or mind, in a plural sense of the term. A common theme amongst all of these multivaried definitions of power is the ability to enact, influence, control, or make manifest of something upon another. Throughout history, various philosophers have contributed to the discussions and theories upon power, often evoking its multidimensional applications, manifestations, and implications in society. This includes, although not limited to, the writings of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan, Jean-Jacques Rousseau's The Social Contract, and Karl Marx's Das Kapital. Two philosophers who have contributed significantly to the theories of power in recent centuries are that of the 19th century German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche and the 20th century French philosopher Michel Foucault, who have both respectively expanded the scope of power to a profusion of understandings, which extend beyond mere immediate physiological applications of the term. In Nietzsche's use of the word power, the German words Macht and Kraft are frequently used within Nietzsche's original writings. Stemming from the German word machen, which means to make or to do, the German word Macht translates into English as might, which reflects the assertive aspect of power concerning the abilities and capacities to initiate something. Kraft, on the other hand, whilst quite literally translating directly into English as power or strength, has a much more broader understanding, denoting inner strength, vitality, energy, or forces of transformation. In this context, Nietzsche's original use of the term power evokes metaphysical, psychological, and spirited qualities as much as it does physiological qualities. Writing during a period in which the victory of modern science, modern technology, industrial capitalism, and secular values were in full effect in a modern unified Germany, Nietzsche saw in modern industrial society not only the loss of power and vitalism among industrial modern subjects, but also a lack of acknowledgement for the ways in which modern power was manifesting itself upon and seemingly against the life essence of society. The legacies of the scientific, French and industrial revolutions upon Europe, and Germany most particularly, had conjured in Nietzsche's eyes a nihilistic, docile, infantile, and deplorable resentful mass whom were ensured of their power through the ideological promises of progress and equality in the era of modernity. Indeed, for Nietzsche, power prevailed over modern humans in disguise of the promises of bringing an end to suffering and foreclosing the tide of an unpredictable history. Such movements and ideologies which proclaimed to triumph such promises included for Nietzsche egalitarianism, rationalism, positivism, techno-scientific progressivism, capitalism, nationalism, socialism, anarchism, and proto-fascism or anti-Semitism. The visions of these powers, according to Nietzsche, had without full awareness inherited to varying extents continuing Christian ideals and values relating to suffering, moral worth, justice, truth, progress, and transcendence from the material world. These visions, nonetheless, particularly that of secular egalitarianism for Nietzsche, sought to disempower individuals from recognizing and actualizing their own capacities for creative power, so that other forms of modern power may be more effectively exercised against them. In The Twilight of the Idols, Nietzsche recalls the reign of terror which followed from the initiation of the French Revolution, for which he makes his thoughts clear upon the subject of Enlightenment equality. The doctrine of equality, but there is no more poisonous poison, for it seems to be preached by justice itself, while in fact it is the end of justice, equal for equals, unequal for unequals. That would be the true voice of justice, and its consequence, never make unequals equal. The fact that this doctrine of equality was surrounded by such horrors and blood has given this modern idea, par excellence, a sort of glory and radiance, so that the revolution as a spectacle has seduced even the most noblest of spirits. In this context, Nietzsche saw in modern egalitarianism an equality of resentment, an equality which seeks to bring down and level out all that flourishes in power, so as to make equal the powerless resentful mass with those of affirming power, as one homogeneous mass. It would be this apprehension of equality, rather than an equality of differing qualities of creative forces, that Nietzsche would critique as a negation and debasement of power. Certainly, power remains a focal point throughout Nietzsche's broader philosophy, especially in the overcoming of nihilism. By virtue of being close to German intellectual and academic centers as a professor of philology at the University of Basel from 1869 until 1879, Nietzsche would also come to witness the history-ending modern power which emanated within academic institutions, as scholars tended towards the modern dogma that scientific knowledge and objective truth were all that prevailed for humans to understand their place in the world and wider cosmos. Here, Nietzsche recognized not only the limits of knowledge and truth in amending the human condition, but more fundamentally, how they were leveraged as tools in service to prevailing systems and ideologies of power. In recounting the origin of knowledge and truth in human societies, Nietzsche argues in The Gay Science that the power of knowledge as employed within human societies has not only been utilized for mere neutral intellectual activities, but has been utilized for its abilities to maintain and nurture human existence. The strength of knowledge does not depend on its degree of truth, but on its age, on the degree to which it has been incorporated, on its character as a condition of life. The intellectual fight became an occupation, an attraction, a profession, a duty, something dignified, and eventually knowledge and the striving for the true found their place as a need among other needs. Thus knowledge became a piece of life itself, and hence a continually growing power. The power within knowledge is not only cultivated by humans for its accuracy, but for its influence in the continuation of human life. The human drive for enhancement and improvement is in this sense to be found within the capacity to yield and apply knowledge in ways that provide new capacities for the human being to thrive. Knowledge is therefore a dynamic force, becoming further integrated within the human domain and exercised for the creation of new truths that are neither fully positive nor fully negative. In a symbiotic-like relationship, knowledge empowers the dynamism of humans, and humans expand the power of knowledge. What is considered true, therefore, is contingent within a given epoch and society, which has necessitated the application of knowledge to produce a system of truths which are necessary for the continued survival of a given population and/or system of power. In the current day, scientific and technological discoveries, particularly in the context of space exploration, serve in tandem with the interests of powerful venture capitalists, who seek to expand the free market to the domain of space in the name of techno-scientific progress. From Nietzsche's perspective, knowledge is crucially inseparable from the power of human interests. The use of knowledge in service towards mere self-preservation is for Nietzsche, however, indicative of limitation, stagnation, and distress. The wish to preserve oneself is the symptom of a condition of distress, of a limitation of the really fundamental instinct of life which aims at the expansion of power, and, wishing for that, frequently risks and even sacrifices self-preservation. In this sense, a self-preserving knowledge to power is weakened and overburdened by the weight of its own obsolescence. For Nietzsche, the fundamental instinct of life is neither to be found in self-preservation or in the acquisition of truth, but rather in the pursuit of ever greater power and transformation. Features of this drive include risk-taking and even potential sacrifice of one's own self-preservation for the pursuit of ever greater transforming powers. The primacy of the will as the driving force in human existence is never finalized, but continuously evolving beyond itself to forge new novel modes of life for the human experience. Knowledge can certainly play a crucial role in the development of such a process, but it is crucially never an end in such a process. This seeking and movement beyond for Nietzsche, however, is not to be conflated with a process of conceitedness and vengefulness, as epitomized in the Chinese Cultural Revolution, which proclaimed to destroy the old, to build the new, through means of humiliation, annihilation, and violent coercion in the vision of an all-encompassing egalitarianism. Rather, the traits of what Nietzsche considers the strength of the will are that of the humbled, yet creatively abundant noble types who have re-evaluated and established values for themselves which do not require their disclosure through the violent submission of the other, but rather speak through the graceful actions and character of a given noble individual. In Beyond Good and Evil, Nietzsche comments on the spirit of his era in the late 19th century. The spirit of the times and the virtue of the times are weakening and diluting the will. Nothing is so fashionable as weakness of will. In Europe today, it is only the herd animal who is honored and bestows honor. Equal rights can all too easily be transformed into equality of wrong, into a shared struggle against everything rare, strange, privileged, and against the higher human, the higher soul, their higher duty, the higher responsibility, the creative abundance of power and elegance. These days, being noble, wanting to be for oneself, managing to be different, standing alone and needing to live independently, are integral to the concepts of greatness, and the philosopher will reveal something of his own ideal when he asserts, the greatest person should be the one who can be most lonely, most hidden, most deviant, the man beyond good and evil, the master of his virtues, abundantly rich in will. This is what greatness should mean, the ability to be both multifarious and whole, both wide and full. The power of the noble type is a power of overflowing abundance, defined by their ability to enrich and bring forth life-affirming values to others, who wish to share in the vitality of life, beyond the moral binaries of good and evil. Additionally, the validation of nobleness comes from within and flows upon others as opposed to dominating and leveling. The reverence for one's own values as a source of overflowing fullness and happiness expands not only outwards towards others, but also inwards, as such noble types enhance the mastery over themselves and their actions, guided by a sense of authentic self-mastery, self-integrity, and self-respect. The feelings of mercy, love, kindness, and affirmation of all that is beautiful come naturally upon themselves and upon others. The power to manifest such flourishing of life also comes with an acute awareness of severity of consciousness. Indeed, the noble types, according to Nietzsche, are capable of manifesting both severity and kindness. The noble type of person feels himself as determining value. He does not need approval. He judges that what is harmful to me is harmful per se. He knows that he is the one who causes things to be revered in the first place. He creates values. Everything that he knows of himself, he reveres. This kind of moral code is self-glorifying. In the foreground is a feeling of fullness, of overflowing power, of happiness in great tension, an awareness of a wealth that would like to bestow and share. The noble person will also help the unfortunate, but not, or not entirely, out of pity, but rather from the urgency created by an excess of power. The noble person reveres the power in himself, and also his power over himself, his ability to speak and to be silent, to enjoy the practice of severity and harshness towards himself, and to respect everything that is severe and harsh. For Nietzsche, although acts of deceit, vengeance and brutality do not concern the higher noble types of processual life affirmation, such despicable acts nonetheless do not fall outside the purview of power. Indeed, in Nietzsche's Genealogy and/or uncovering into the origins of morality, he reveals an archetype of particular power from within the lowly and slave castes of Greco-Roman society, in contrast to the archetype of master morality, as epitomized in the aristocracy of antiquity, who acted out and defined their own ways of life as vigorous and vitalistic, and values as naturally and authentically good, glorious and beautiful. Nietzsche opposed them to the slave morality of early Christians in the Roman Empire, whom forged their religious community among the powerless, downtrodden, and resentful members of Roman society, whom typically had power exercised against them. In disseminating the moral, manichaeistic, and ascetic codes of early Christian doctrine, the values of early Roman Christianity, therefore, inverted the hierarchy of Greco-Roman values. The values of strength, power, beauty, agency, and vitality were replaced and championed by the new values of weakness, submission, mediocrity, obedience, and apathy. Slave morality challenged the very hierarchy which enabled the existence of the pagan Greco-Roman aristocracy, and sought to empower the oppressed by endowing their oppression in moral worth and in the prospects of an afterlife. Nietzsche ascribed this process to the priestly castes of Roman society, who could not freely exercise and manifest their own power, and so resorted to the same reinversion of values, and cunningly established a new hierarchy of power over the lives of those who craved power most, and nurtured resentment against those who possessed it. Priests make everything more dangerous, not just medicaments and healing arts, but pride, revenge, acumen, debauchery, love, lust for power, virtue, sickness. In any case, with some justification, one could add that man first became an interesting animal on the foundation of this essentially dangerous form of human existence, the priest, and that the human soul became deep in the higher sense and turned evil for the first time. This creative metaphysical burst of power Nietzsche coins as ressentiment, as a form of resentment which is self-sustaining and constructive in its ability to make manifest a world in which the formerly lowest values of man are now highest. As testament to the power of ressentiment, Christianity would come to engulf and internalize itself upon the Roman elite, who would certify the victory of the lowest values in the rule of Emperor Constantine, who sought to integrate Christianity into the aristocratic pagan hierarchy and broader Greco-Roman world. Following his conversion in 312 AD, Greco-Roman paganism would be officially denounced under the rule of Emperor Theodosius I, who officially made Christianity the state religion of the Roman Empire in 380 AD. The will of the masses to cherish and embrace the religion of Christianity throughout European history was for Nietzsche, however, a necessary requirement for the conditions of suffering peoples, and further recognized that Christianity itself gave birth to new cultures, art forms, architecture, aesthetic experience, and schools of thought. Nevertheless, for Nietzsche, the will to truth and the life-denying repressions of power and creative transformation in modernity stem in large part from the continued influence of Christian values upon modern Western society, for which the Christian turn of phrase, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth," continues to reign across the ages. The historic longevity of this life-denialism persists into modern secular humans, according to Nietzsche, who are in part incapable of wielding power for themselves, as they cling to and/or endure pre-assembled forms of power, which were designed to the behest of other power seekers. As a result, man in the era of modernity is susceptible to the feelings of insufficiency, weakness, and resentment. As they crave a power they will never be able to fully possess, and is otherwise often exercised against them. Consequently, they externalize these vicious feelings of inadequacy onto others, and belittle those who reveal their strengths beyond the confines of what they have defined as desirable. Benefiting and hurting others are ways of exercising one's power upon others. That is all one desires in such cases. One hurts those whom one wants to feel one's power, for pain is a much more efficient means to that end than pleasure. Pain always raises the question about its origin, while pleasure is inclined to stop with itself without looking back. Certainly, the state in which we hurt others is rarely as agreeable in an unadulterated way as that in which we benefit others. It is a sign that we are still lacking power, or it shows as a sense of frustration in the face of this poverty. It is accompanied by new dangers and uncertainties for what power we do possess, and clouds our horizon with the prospect of revenge, scorn, punishment, and failure. To exercise power within the infliction of pain and/or suffering is for Nietzsche a degeneration of power that reveals the lack of power beholden in a given individual or collective. This weakness to power, so to speak, is merely one dimension of power, as a deteriorated form of power that inevitably engulfs the individual or collective in an inferno of continued resentment, contentment, punishment, and revenge. Failure to obtain authentic power is the ultimate cascade of this descent into the abyss of resentment. Power is therefore just as much an activity of the psyche as it is one of the body. Whilst the historical philosophical concepts or genealogical archetypes of slave and master morality are representative of dueling value systems, with master morality serving as the foundational background towards the development of higher beings in Nietzsche's philosophy, Nietzsche would nonetheless herald the Übermensch, or overman ideal, as the ideal expression of a higher state of being and power. In this sense, both master morality and slave morality are to be transcended for the envisioned Übermensch ideal, which symbolically represents an individual who persistently strives for self-creation and transformation beyond the limits of themselves in accordance to their own will to power. As creators of life-affirming values, perceptions, experiences, discoveries, artworks, cultures, philosophies, and so forth. Akin to the noble type, the Übermensch ideal is crucially never finalized or completed, but rather it is an ideal that is always in the process and making. Man is something that shall be overcome. All beings so far have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great flood, and even go back to the beasts rather than overcome man? What is ape to man? A laughingstock or painful embarrassment. And man shall be that to overman, a laughingstock or painful embarrassment. You have made your own way from worm to man, and much in you is still worm. Once you were apes, and even now too, man is more ape than any ape. Behold, I teach you the overman. The overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. I conjure you, my brethren, remain faithful to the earth, and believe not those who speak unto you of otherworldly hopes. Poisoners are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they, decaying ones and poisoned ones themselves, of whom the earth is weary. Man is a rope, tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge, and not an end. Amidst the backdrop of which humans might manifest the power of a higher ideal, Nietzsche claims that power and transformation underlies all matter in the world and is not simply a human affair. In this sense, the will to power serves as the very underlying principle of the cosmos upon which matter, energy, space, time, and the laws of physics unfold in ever greater complexity and form. This world, a monster of energy without beginning, without end, a firm, iron magnitude of force that does not grow bigger or smaller, that does not expend itself but only transforms itself, as a force throughout, as a play of forces and waves of forces, at the same time one and many, increasing here and at the same time decreasing there. A sea of forces flowing and rushing together, eternally changing, eternally flooding back, with tremendous years of recurrence, with an ebb and a flood of its forms, out of the simplest forms striving toward the most complex. This Dionysian world of the eternally self-creating, the eternally self-destroying, this mystery world of the twofold voluptuous delight. This world is the will to power, and nothing besides, and you yourselves are also this will to power, and nothing besides. Indeed, for Nietzsche, the world and universe is never existing in a state of stasis, but is always unfolding in a state of becoming through transformation. The human is likewise a part of this process of unfolding, forging into being throughout history, new ways of life, new truths, new myths, new values, new laws, and new understandings on the place of the human, for the better or the worse. Power is therefore inescapable. No organic being can exist outside of it. Rather, it channels through the world one way or another. Even when power is sought to be repressed, power will inevitably reveal itself through repression. Finally, however, where the will to power is absent, there is a tendency towards decline, regression and degeneration in all human spheres of life, according to Nietzsche. However, for wherever there is decline, resistance to such decline will herald and bring forth new novel modes of overcoming and transformation. Continuing from the Nietzschean themes of power, the 20th century French philosopher Michel Foucault, as influenced by the Marxist and phenomenological trends in French intellectual life in the mid-20th century, would expand such understandings of power to the formation of human subjects and the ways in which such subjectivities shape our experiences of reality. In this respect, Foucault was interested not so much in defining or elaborating a single theory of power, but rather he sought to describe relations of power and how power is exercised. As Foucault states in The History of Sexuality, Volume 1, that he seeks to move less toward a theory of power than toward an analytics of power, that is, toward a definition of the specific domain formed by relations of power, and toward a determination of the instruments that will make possible its analysis. Similar to Nietzsche, Foucault takes power as a given, which is pervasive and dispersed across all spheres of the social domain. Additionally, Foucault contends that power is not an explicitly vertical and negative phenomena, but equally manifests itself horizontally, exerting positive influences. In The History of Sexuality, Foucault critiques the 5 traditional understandings of hierarchical power, those being the negative relation, the insistence of the rule, the cycle of prohibition, the logic of censorship, and the uniformity of the apparatus. For Foucault, understandings of power that are solely concerned with the repressive, hierarchical, and law-enforcing relations of power cannot accurately describe the diverse multiplicities and mechanisms of power in the era of modernity. Why is this juridical notion of power, involving as it does the neglect of everything that makes for its productive effectiveness, its strategic resourcefulness, its positivity, so readily accepted? In a society such as ours, where the devices of power are so numerous, its rituals so visible, and its instruments ultimately so reliable, in this society that has been more imaginative, probably, than any other in creating devious and supple mechanisms of power, what explains this tendency not to recognize the latter, except in the negative and emaciated form of prohibition? Why are the deployments of power reduced simply to the procedure of the law of interdiction? One remains attached to a certain image of power law, of power sovereignty, which was traced out by the theoreticians of right and the monarchic institution. It is this image that we must break free of, that is, of the theoretical privilege of law and sovereignty, if we wish to analyze power within the concrete and historical framework of its operation. We must construct an analytics of power that no longer takes law as a model and a code. For Foucault, power in the era of modernity does not stem alone from a single entity downwards, nor is it explicitly limiting or repressing. Rather, power in the era of modernity is both relational and bidirectional, with an array of agents and institutions constituting a formation of power relations and networks. Likewise, the lines between negative and positive expressions of power are indistinctly blurred, as power seeks to enable both new possibilities and forms of knowledge, all while simultaneously determine and maintain such constructs through a variety of mechanisms and controls. This fluidity of power in the current day can be exemplified in the dynamism of social media trends, corporate marketing, gentrified urban planning, public health interventions, and in the earliest adaptations of artificial intelligence. In each case, power is expressed dynamically to cultivate new structures and energies for power to be expressed and explored. These processes of power include an array of institutions and harness mass populations, all while simultaneously employing certain mechanisms of surveillance to maintain degrees of normality and predictability, further ensuring that power is reinforced across all levels of a given social relation, as modern subjects come to internalize what is normal and abnormal for themselves and others. Power must be understood in the first instance as the multiplicity of force relations immanent in the sphere in which they operate and which constitute their own organization, as the process which, through ceaseless struggles and confrontations, transforms, strengthens, or reverses them, as the support which these force relations find in one another, thus forming a chain or a system, or on the contrary, the disjunctions and contradictions which isolate them from one another, and lastly, as the strategies in which they take effect, whose general design or institutional crystallization is embodied in the state apparatus, in the formulation of the law, in the various social hegemonies. Certainly, this is not to say that law formulation, repression, violence, and verticality are completely absent from Foucault's understanding of power relations, but rather they simply represent one relation among many others, and are usually employed when more permissive relations of power break down and cause deviations and ruptures in the social fabric of a given modern society. For Foucault, power in the era of modernity is simply more effective when it does not have to employ force and can rather rely on the self-disciplinary modes of conscious thought and expression within entire populations. Power is omnipresent, not because it has the privilege of consolidating everything under its invincible unity, but because it is produced from one moment to the next, at every point, or rather, in every relation from one point to another. Power is everywhere, not because it embraces everything, but because it comes from everywhere. And power, insofar as it is permanent, repetitious, inert, and self-reproducing, is simply the overall effect that emerges from all these mobilities, the concatenation that rests on each of them and seeks in turn to arrest their movement. One needs to be nominalistic, no doubt. Power is not an institution and not a structure, neither is it a certain strength we are endowed with. It is the name that one attributes to a complex strategical situation in a particular society. Power, in this sense, is not something one can escape nor exit outside of. Rather, relations of power persist, even when there is seemingly a negation of power. Additionally, power is not beholden more to any given individual subject than it is for any other. Rather, there are only variations of power as they arise from within any given social relation. Power, according to Foucault, is therefore not something one acquires, obtains, or loses, as power is always embedded within social relations, and individual subjects are always situated within these relations, influencing and being influenced by such relations. The complexity and asymmetry of power relations suggests then that no one can have an objective bird's-eye view on the function of power. Instead, Foucault advocates for a descriptive approach concerning the multifaceted modes in which power reveals itself. Whilst Foucault argues that the all-embracive relations of power are inescapable, he nonetheless suggests that where there is power, there is also variations of resistance, which are themselves never external to power, but rather resist within and through power. Where there is power, there is resistance, and yet, or rather consequently, this resistance is never in a position of exteriority in relations to power. Should it be said that one is always inside power, there is no escaping it. There is no absolute outside where it is concerned, because one is subject to the law in any case. Or that, history being the ruse of reason, power is the ruse of history, always emerging the winner. This would be to misunderstand the strictly relational character of power relationships. Their existence depends on a multiplicity of points of resistance. These play the role of adversary, target, support, or handle in power relations. These points of resistance are present everywhere in the power network. Hence, there is no single locus of great refusal, no soul of revolt, source of all rebellions, or pure law of the revolutionary. In rejecting a monolithic locus of resistance, Foucault argues that there is no clear distinction between those who hold power and those who resist power, suggesting that they are both intertwined and mutually shaping one another within the same relational framework. Perhaps an example of this blurred mutually bound resistance in the modern day can be perceived within the MAGA movement and broader American conservative movement, from which resistance to the liberal and/or neoliberal state crosses over a variety of intersections, as members of the American working class find themselves in reciprocal alliance with politicians, billionaires, corporations, fossil fuel lobbyists, and media conglomerates, who are themselves to varying extents embodied within the system of the neoliberal state, which they seek to undermine. Indeed, the MAGA movement is perceived as both revolutionary and counter-revolutionary simultaneously. On top of that, neoliberalism has created the very conditions from which the MAGA movement has sought to exert itself, from suburban alienation to wealth inequality, hyper-individualism, media hyperreality, and unfettered economic competition and privatization. Within Foucault's philosophy, two of his most renowned concepts concerning power in the era of modernity are the notions of biopolitics and biopower, in contrast to the medieval or pre-modern forms of power, which centered on the authority of the sovereign and the sovereign's right to withhold life from any of his ruled subjects and enforce behavioral codes through the employment of public executions. Foucault argues that the ancient right to take life or let live was replaced by a power to foster life or disallow it to the point of death. The turn from a power to withhold life to a power to generate life was for Foucault not a moral transformation, but rather a material transformation concerning population growth and the rise of capitalism in the 17th century. In smaller populated medieval societies, public punishments and executions could be utilized to ensure population control through fear and symbolic association with the sovereign's wrath. In larger populated modern societies, Foucault suggests that public punishments and executions became increasingly risky and unstable for capitalist power structures to maintain, as such spectacles of punishment and death could ignite feelings of sympathy with the punished and potentially lead to uprisings, for which the masses now overwhelmingly outnumbered the elite. This transformation of power relations would manifest itself within the development of prison systems that sought to conceal punishment away from the masses and toward a form of punishment which reconditioned bodies towards the expectations of a capitalist social order, as capitalist modernity required the mass mobilization of a given populace to produce and reproduce the conditions which maintain the hegemony of a flourishing capitalist elite in relation to a servile laboring class. A core historical component to this transformation, according to Foucault, was to be seen in the architectural development of the panopticon prison system in the early 19th century by the English social theorist Jeremy Bentham, who conjured the design as a more efficient and utilitarian structure for the management of prisoners. The panopticon prison system is characterized by a central observation tower, which enables the possibility of persistent visibility upon a variety of isolated and individualized prison chambers. The inmates, however, cannot see into the observation chamber, as the windows are blacked out, and the only others they can perceive are other imprisoned inmates. As it was intended, the panoptic power structure cultivates internalized discipline, as the uncertainty of being observed and potentially facing physical punishment fosters within the inmates self-discipline and self-scrutiny in the self-regulation of their behaviors. Over an extended period of time, pattern-like self-regulatory behaviors, as enforced through the mechanisms of persistent surveillance and normalization, ensure the voluntary obedience of the inmates to conform to a given set of expectations. Other techniques of bodily self-regulation were also applied throughout the prison system, all with the intention of adapting the body and consciousness of the inmates to the requirements of modern capitalist society. For Bentham, the panopticon system was perceived to be the most utilitarian model for the reintegration of inmates back into society, as it required a minimal amount of enforcers and relied extensively on its overtly rationalized architectural design to maintain order. For Foucault, the panoptic power structure served as the infrastructural basis from which power in the era of capitalist modernity would notably exert itself, as elements of its structure would later be employed across a domain of modern institutions. The panopticon is an important mechanism, for it automatizes and disindividualizes power. Power has its principle not so much in a person as in a certain concerted distribution of bodies, surfaces, lights, gazes, in an arrangement whose internal mechanisms produce the relation in which individuals are caught up. The ceremonies, the rituals, the marks by which the sovereign's surplus power was manifested are useless. There is a machinery that assures dissymmetry, disequilibrium, difference. Consequently, it does not matter who exercises power. Any individual, taken almost at random, can operate the machine, which, whatever use one may wish to put it to, produces homogeneous effects of power. Indeed, for Foucault, the panopticon system is at once highly centralized, as based on its centrally stationed observation tower, and at the same time decentralized, insofar as no one ever needs to be fully present in the central observation tower, which can also be occupied by anyone, and the power of self-regulation encompasses all participants in the panopticon system, including the officers and enforcers of the system. Integral to the panopticon system was the formation of knowledge upon inmates, as central observers could obtain information regarding their movements, behaviors, routines, and interactions. This process of surveilling the disciplinary modes of self-regulation established a form of knowledge to the behest of the overseers, who could determine which methods of surveillance and discipline were most effective in maintaining self-regulatory normalization. The panopticon was a laboratory. It could be used as a machine to try out experiments, to alter behavior, to train or correct individuals, to experiment with medicines and monitor their effects, to try out different punishments on prisoners according to their crimes and character, and to seek the most effective ones, to teach different techniques simultaneously to the workers, to decide which is the best. The theme of the panopticon, at once surveillance and observation, security and knowledge, individualization and totalization, isolation and transparency, found in the prison its privileged locus of realization. More broadly for Foucault, the rise of analytically orientated power in the wake of the scientific revolution and Enlightenment provided new ways for which institutions could monitor their respective populations, with ever greater information concerning the biological, physiological, and later psychological conditions of a necessary labor force to maintain an increasing system of capitalism. Insights into health, hygiene, fertility rates, mortality rates, migration, and the standardization of social customs were all defining features of what Foucault would consider biopolitics and biopower, in expanding the scope of power in the era of modernity and maintaining standardized regimes of life. Biopower, centered on the body as a machine, its disciplining, the optimization of its capabilities, the extortion of its forces, the parallel increase of its usefulness and its docility, its integration into systems of efficient and economic controls. All of this was ensured by the procedures of power that characterized the disciplines and anatomopolitics of the human body. Biopolitics focused on the species body, the body imbued with the mechanics of life, and serving as the basis of the biological processes, propagation, births and mortality, the levels of health, life expectancy and longevity, with all the conditions that can cause these to vary. Their supervision was effected through an entire series of interventions and regulatory controls, a biopolitics of the population. Similar to Nietzsche's perspectives, Foucault saw in the increasing rationalization of power throughout modern history its inseparability from the acquisition and production of knowledge to the service of institutions and individual agents who disseminate knowledge across a network of power relations. In this sense, knowledge is never simply a reflection of a given society, but rather is constructed and shaped by networks of knowledge-based institutions and social discourses. Through a process of normalization and classification, certain fields of knowledge are either elevated, dismissed, or perhaps even censored within a given society for the maintenance of its continuation and stability. An example of this power relation regarding knowledge in the current day is the dismissal and rejection of indigenous-based knowledge systems in favor of explicitly modern sciences in understanding the human relation to the world. Knowledge that is normalized and elevated within a given society, therefore, further regulates and reveals particular subjectivities concerning how individuals perceive themselves and others. The infusion of power and knowledge crucially enables modern societies to be more comprehensible, predictable, and controllable as a mapped-out network of predetermined potentialities and outcomes. In the current day, data acquisition and the datafication of everyday life, as facilitated by digital technologies and platforms, has enabled the intervention by tech companies and other corporations to harvest information en masse concerning the digital activities and preferences of entire populations. Such interventions into the digital lives of the masses allows for corporations and prominent market agents to further refine consumer desires and optimize calculations for profitable market investments. Returning to Foucault, the specialization of modern disciplinary power in both the mechanisms of knowledge acquisition and mass surveillance are to be found in what he considers local centers of power, such as schools, prisons, hospitals, factories, and other institutions. The panopticon system is polyvalent in its applications. It serves to reform prisoners, but also to treat patients, to instruct school children, to confine the insane, to supervise workers, to put beggars and idlers to work. It is a type of location of bodies in space, of distribution of individuals in relation to one another, of hierarchical organization, of disposition of centers and channels of power, of definition of the instruments and modes of intervention of power, which can be implemented in hospitals, workshops, schools, prisons. Whenever one is dealing with a multiplicity of individuals on whom a task or a particular form of behavior must be imposed, the panoptic schema may be used. It is applicable to all establishments whatsoever in which, within a space not too large to be covered or commanded by buildings, a number of persons are meant to be kept under inspection. Indeed, it is within these institutions, according to Foucault, that disciplinary and self-regulatory panoptic powers assist in the formation of subjectivities that are indicative of a capitalist social order, which heralds rationalism, individualism, competitiveness, meritocracy, reductive materialism, and consumerism as standardized features of modern subjects. Fundamentally, patterns of power relations and subjectivities are to be expressed and maintained all the way down, from the most immediate day-to-day conversations all the way up to the most prominent bureaucratic institutions, in encompassing a total regime of modern power. With reference to neoliberalism in particular, Foucault maintains that the prevailing post-industrial subjectivity in modern capitalist societies is homo economicus, a concept not directly developed by Foucault, but further explored in his philosophy of subjectivity. The theory of homo economicus, or economic humans, as forged under the system of neoliberalism, perceives humans as fundamentally rational, self-interested, market-driven, and equipped with a certain degree of knowledge which ensures the prevailing of such factors just listed. Concerned solely with management, efficiency, competition, consumption, and market exchange, neoliberal subjectivity perceives the self as a mini-entrepreneur which desires to maximize their individual interests in the hopes of obtaining the recognition of one's self as a wealthy and materially sufficient economic agent. In coming to see the self in such a way, homo economic individuals also perceive the other as fundamentally rational, resourceful, and market-driven. Whilst Foucault would not live long enough to witness the integration of the panoptic power structure with modern technologies under neoliberalism in the last decade of the 20th century and beginning of the 21st century, the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze would expand upon his notions of the panopticon concerning new methods of computational surveillance and the formation of the individual in the 1990s. Similarly, the German-Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han has also expanded upon Foucault's notion of the panopticon in relation to the non-architectural decentralization of the panoptic structure in modern technologies and social media in the 21st century. For both Nietzsche and Foucault, similarities can be seen in the fact that they both consider power to be value neutral and something which cannot be interpreted through any moral binary, as power is contingent, transformative, and relational to the given context in which it arises. The relation between knowledge and power is also to be found in the two philosophers, with Nietzsche's analysis focusing on how power shapes the production of knowledge and truth, whilst Foucault's analysis focuses upon how power operates in the production and regulation of knowledge, for the creation of self-disciplinary subjectivities. For both philosophers, knowledge power is additionally value neutral, as knowledge in Nietzsche's philosophy, whilst not an end in itself, can be utilized in the process of self-overcoming. For Foucault, knowledge of populations can prevent pandemics, guarantee necessary social welfare, and ensure social stability. Certainly, think of what the artist or dancer could not achieve without particular knowledge concerning their crafts. Power, therefore, for both Nietzsche and Foucault, despite its destructive potential, is primarily a constructive and generative force in the establishment of novel knowledge, subjects, truths, values, institutions, and technologies, and so forth. In close relation, both philosophers also emphasize resistance, with Nietzsche stressing that wherever the will to power diminishes and nihilism subsumes, resistance to such conditions will arise in the form of persistent overcomings and expansions of the will. Foucault, on the other hand, emphasizes the relational conditions of resistance, suggesting that various agents and collectives engage in resistance through a variety of intersecting relations that are not always easily defined. With regards to differences, Nietzsche's and Foucault's philosophies of power differ notably on the context in which they are concerned with power. Whilst Nietzsche emphasizes the power in the self-overcoming of nihilism and decadent values alongside the background of a metaphysical framework, Foucault's concern with power focuses more on the historicity and contingency of power in remote networks of relations and discursive formations. In addition to this, Nietzsche's apprehension of power is most notably concerned with its relation to the individual and with broader critiques upon the moral foundations of modern societies. Foucault, on the other hand, is more concerned with the operations of power with regards to institutions and relations, providing a more historical and descriptive understanding on the mechanisms and functions of power. Crucially, it is important to understand how power reveals itself in the modern era, from the resentment it conjures upon those who have internalized the power which is exercised against them, to the ways in which it reveals itself in social relational structures which are considered to be power neutral or absent of power. It is from these notions that we can engage with and critique the various ways resentment shapes modern neoliberal subjectivity and might be exploited to fulfill a given function, and how power reveals itself in otherwise conventional and normatively endorsed domains of modern neoliberal capitalist society.